Hello, today our guest is Chris Perez. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great.
So, Chris, you are a contributor to Medium, and you will be talking about some of your articles. The first article to be discussed is your piece on the alt-right and libertarianism. The alt-right, a libertarian appraisal. Tell us a little about that article.
Yeah, I also write on hopping.org, by the way, and my article, "The Alt-Right, a Libertarian Reprisal," it was very simply a another look at the alt-right in the sense, maybe not in the sense of Richard Spencer himself, but the alt-right in the modern sense, which has been brought about by the dissident right and American Renaissance. I really think that to be the rise of like Groypers and American Renaissance's continued stay and continued potency. So what I did there was essentially try to show how these two ideologies, that of the libertarians and the paleoconservatives or the white nationalists, are not that far apart and are reconcilable. And in fact, we are much more easily reconciled with those groups than we are with whether it be anarcho-communists or just leftists or even left-wing uh, libertarians, normally left-wing libertarians. Of course, not the more moderate ones like Roderick Long, which I think are much more respectable,
Yes,
but
Roderick is
the
very smart, and Matt
yeah
Zwolinski. Yes.
yeah, but some of the more kooky ones, which is the ones I was trying to attack. Uh, so basically, what I did here is show how a libertarian society will propagate the views that many paleocons and many people who are a part of American Renaissance would like. That being generally things like white separation, and anti-homosexual and anti-egalitarian sentiments, and how these things are core tenets not only to those groups, which I dubbed the alt-right as an easy all-covering term, but also to us in the sense that us libertarians must recognize that, look, races are not going to live together. Homosexuality is almost certainly not going to be something that we just that we just come about and accept, and things like egalitarianism are almost antithetical to a theory of private property.
All right. But before I ask some more questions about your article, I must interject. Chris, some of us don't understand the alt-right. The alt-right versus the Twitter alt-right, the mimetic alt-right is very different.
Yeah, there
Libert,
is. Go ahead.
you may go ahead.
Yeah, there is that huge stark difference that you have these people who are more of like the Pepe meme guys or the Groyper memes who arise on Twitter, but there is an intellectual base for the alt
Yes,
right.
yes.
You
No,
see, Kevin McDonald is a very good example. You had him on your show recently.
he's very
He
brilliant, and the show did well. People like him.
he's a very intelligent and very useful person for our movement.
Yes, but let me continue, Chris. So
Yep.
when we're talking about the alt-right, we must acknowledge that the alt-right is a modern movement. The alt-right wants to propose an alternative to the bankrupt nature of modern conservatism. Furthermore, people on the right are naturally anti-equality. And by anti-equality, I'm referring to both legal equality and natural equality. There is a brilliant writer. I read him, and I encourage more people to read him. Maybe I'm not pronouncing his name correctly. He was European, but he's called Eric von Lidin, Leddhi, and that's his last name. And Eric is very brilliant. And in one of his books, he argues that the legal system should not discriminate. However, we treat adults differently from children. So the point that I'm making is this: people on the real right, we do not value equality.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think
Yes,
that was the point I was trying to make. That the left-right dichotomy that's been propagated constantly is one of socialism versus capitalism. And while that's useful in a sense because it almost represents what we really are talking about, the left-right dichotomy, which I tried to establish, was more of a anti-equality, anti-egalitarianism
exactly. And anti,
versus
yeah, and
equality and
pro diversity in
egalitarianism.
terms of ideas.
Yeah, that's another part of it. And that's essentially what I was trying to put forward, that really the dichotomy that we've created of like socialism versus capitalism, it does kind of help because socialism trends towards equality and capitalism will always trend towards anti-egalitarianism. But it is based around, more importantly, the anti-egalitarianism. That is the view, like a real reactionary view of society, which is that people are unequal and we must have continued uh, acceptance of this inequality. We must have like a division of labor. So that's the difference, really. That, and that's where I think we find the strongest middle ground with the alt right, that they're willing to recognize this, and they're, unlike many other libertarians, they're willing to recognize this in areas which people are often fearful of recognizing it, like for example race.
Yes, and the traditional right also asserts that diversity in terms of ideas is very important, but at the same time, it is a particularistic philosophy. We
Yes.
only tolerate diversity up to a point. So, for example, I have no problem with immigrants moving to America, but they must assimilate. And civic nationalism is not a code word for assimilation. Civic
Mhm.
nationalists are really saying if you become a citizen, then we should love you and you're an American. But one does not need to become a part of that wider American culture. And this is why I have an issue with some writers referring to prominent blacks as conservatives, because I've read black writers who lean right, however, they denounce Western conservatism. They argue that it's racist, and then they say blacks are conservative because we believe in the family, the church, and we're anti-abortion. Yes, those are traditional positions, but there's a big difference between being a conservative in the Western tradition and being a conservative in the black tradition. Western conservatism is about preserving a particular philosophy that's unique to the West. So you could be preserving Judeo-Christian ethics or the ethics of Rome or capitalism. Capitalism is unique to the West in the sense that the West created a legal framework allowing the free market to flourish. Markets are not unique to the West, but but institutional capitalism is unique to the West. So by preserving the legacy of capitalism, one can call himself a conservative, although originally conservatives were skeptical of markets. But conserv conservatism is deeper than just saying I don't believe in abortion. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think there's this application of the term conservative to people who maybe they are, they could very easily could be atheists, and they could be like, well, I don't like abortion and I think that we should lower the tax rate a bit. And that is where the problem starts. The thing is that just not liking abortion, I think that's almost an intrinsic position for very many people, and many people will just have that. I know liberals, and I mean that in like in the current sense, not in the classical liberal sense, but I mean
Yes.
I just liberals
But hold
who
on, Chris,
dislike
please call
abortion.
them progressives.
Well, progressive,
American
sure.
liberals are progressive. They're not liberals in the
Yeah,
British sense, and that's the true meaning of the word.
you're right. Yes. So I do know very many people who are progressives who they kind of reject abortion because they have moral objections to it. This is not enough to get you into the conservative category. Uh, People who are conservatives often have to relate somewhat to the old right, have to try to conserve that ideology, or the paleo conservatives. The paleo conservatives tried, in a sense, to conserve the old right ideology, and so did very many paleo libertarians. I think much of it lies in the area of Robert Taft, uh,
Yes.
and many of such people of his time. uh,
Anti-war movement.
the anti-war movement, the pro-markets movement, the traditional movement, these ideologies must, in a sense, be conserved, and if not conserved, if you are not seeking to conserve it, instead you maybe, let's just say you voted for the Iraq War and you're pro the Fed or something, uh, but you don't like abortion.
Mm,
That's not enough to really get you in a conservative movement. That's why
yes,
people like
yes.
George W. Bush are not conservatives.
Yeah, but George W. Bush is agreeing with fanatics who argue that Anglo-Saxons did not create America.
Exactly.
Prior to the
Exactly.
colonization of America by white people, there was no America. America as a concept did not exist.
That's completely true. And worst of all, I mean, look at the comments he made about immigrants. So, he wants mass immigration. Some of his brother, uh, he went from sort of being maybe a slightly more radical John McCain to being essentially a progressive, and a progressive who likes war. And many progressives are big fans of war either way. So I view him, and I view people like him to be often misknown as conservatives, which they are not. And I think you're completely right about that. Even though he may not be a fan of abortion and he may want to lower tax rates, this is not enough. We need to, in a sense, gatekeep. We cannot have an ideology's name destroyed by those who are idiots. When you expand an ideology, you will always have more people, and inevitably the quality of your people will lower. But you cannot have people who willingly and openly uh, change the name and values of your ideology.
Exactly my point. But your piece is explaining the relationship between the alt-right and libertarians, and I want you to talk a little about race and IQ and other
Yes.
issues of importance to race realists.
Oh yeah, I think that the most important issue for the alt right is the racial issue. It's their ethno nationalism and such. And I think that when I first started getting into this was when I read Democracy: The God That Failed. And
Yeah.
if you go to page, I think it's 127 or something like that, in his footnote, there he cites Phil Rushton, and that's where I started getting into the race stuff. So Phil Rushton uh, wrote this book called, and it's very hard to find because people don't want you reading this book, but wrote this book called Race, Evolution, and Behavior. And in this, we see, now this is from 1994. If you want something more recent, you can read Edward Dutton. But we see a very good explanation of why there are race differences in intelligence, how it correlates with general intelligence, to what rate it correlates with general intelligence. And for those who aren't this deep into it, general intelligence is the essentially in psychometrics what IQ is supposed to correlate to. Um, and how it correlates to general intelligence. And he talks about assortative mating and genetic similarity theory in earlier works. But we might go into that in a bit. But his
Hold on,
main,
Chris, just explain genetic similarity theory just
mm,
for a minute.
essentially,
Yeah.
essentially, in very layman's terms, it is the recognition, whether it's subconsciously or consciously, of genes of other people and how they will correlate to us. And often enough, we see people who are phenotypically like us, people who are of our race. And in this sense, we will recognize gene similarity. We will
Yeah, yeah.
recognize that these people are
In other
genetically
words,
more similar.
we like our friends and neighbors and
Yeah,
the nation state.
it often is because of this relation to the family, and race is a very good identifier of who may be a family member to you. So is how they look genetically. Whether it be, for example, blacks have wider nose ridges. So blacks, if they recognize somebody else with a wider nose ridge, they may be a little bit more friendly to them, even if they are not completely black. This is just because this is a way to recognize families. So that's a very common thing, and that's there is some backing for it. I know, I believe Kevin McDonald did some work on this. If not that, it's RK, but it's one of the two.
No,
Um,
the studies are numerous. Of we do know
yes.
based on recent research. Bo Bo did a study, the academic
Mhm.
road for Quillette. It's on human nature and telling, and it
Yes.
tells us that humans are tribal. So we do know that tribalism is innate.
Oh
So
yeah.
there
Well,
is
and that
research to support what you're saying.
yeah, and that is true. And what I'm trying to do here is just establish that tribalism is innate, and the racial groups are themselves a tribe that we can easily recognize, and that's why we're so tied to them. So continuing on that, he also talks about RK theory, and this is an explanation of behavior, the behavior of blacks. Now, if you've been around long enough, we all know the 1350 meme, and it is true, blacks do commit huge amounts of crime. Uh, So the reason why the crime is so disproportionate for blacks, and why, for example, Rushton talked about AIDS in his book because in the 90s that was a big thing, or for example, the reason why still AIDS is a very, very deadly thing in the black community, I guess. The reason why these things happen is because blacks are an R strategy group. They are uh, more fertile. They want to produce maximum amounts of children in shortest amount of times, and this is because of shorter lifespans, and that can correlate to intelligence. That can correlate to much other stuff. Uh, but generally, that's why, because of much shorter lifespans, which they do have. So, and he ties this all back to IQ, and it's really a concise argument. It fulfills itself, and you can really see that he unlike Jensen was able to prove and was able to establish a a reason why this is a reason why IQ is related to crime, and that is something that Jensen could not do. Arthur Jensen being one of the uh,
Leading
smartest minds.
figures in the
Yeah,
IQ movement.
yeah, specifically with the G factor, which is general intelligence, and his work on that. But to go back to Russian, uh, it was really something incredible. And of course, he was attempted to be silenced for it, and he was often, attacked. He was attacked, in fact. And if you read Murray Rothbard's article on the bell curve, he talks about how he essentially had to do Zoom, but for the 90s, in the sense that he had to teach his class via videotape because there was so much fear that something would happen to him. So he came out with radical ideas on race that were backed up, that were purely scientific, uh, that were just rejected. And the reason why they were rejected very clearly is because you can no longer openly talk about race in any way that is a threat to any kind of institute that may benefit from egalitarianism. And our elites currently propagate it. Sam Francis has a good talk in American Renaissance about why that is, if you really want to go deeper into it. But to just give a quick, brief point, the elites kind of rely on our conflict. Our conflict allows for them to build, specifically with the state, a very strict rule over us.
The
So
managerial state.
the managerial state. That's exactly right. And many paleo conservatives recognize this. And this is why, another reason why allyship with the alt right is so important. And we don't need to call them the alt right because of all the reasons that we know of. For example, the optics that have come from them. We can't just call them the dissident right. We can't just call them the Groypers. We can't just call them American Renaissance and people who look out for white advocates, maybe, if that's what people really want. I chose to call them the alt-right because I thought that was a term that most people would understand.
Yeah.
But that's another reason why we need to ally with them, because they, like us, want to crush the managerial state. They, like us, want to end the wars. They, like us, recognize that races will not always, in fact, will rarely be living together in comfortable and ideal situations for both groups.
Yes. But Chris, there are some who will argue that there is a libertarian to the alt-right pipeline. Do you have strong views on this issue? Basically, when I read these articles, I laugh because they're pinpointing to very naive young people who went into the movement without understanding philosophy, economics, or race.
Yeah, if you often, I believe that what they are speaking of when they say the alt right is neo Nazism or fascism. I don't think that they're talking about people like you and me who are simply socially conservative and libertarian. That is the real, I guess, point that I want to drive there. I think they will easily categorize us within the alt right, and they will say, well, you going from Milton Friedman to Hans Hoppe is you going to alt right. If that's what they're talking about, well, then they just don't. These writers have no understanding of libertarianism. But
No.
if they are talking about going from, let's just say, Murray Rothbard to and Hans Hoppe to Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini, then yes, these people who came into the movement came in for a very specific reason, because many times it's because they were young, they were limited in knowledge, and because they did not understand the movement, but they did understand that they wanted to rebel. Uh, I think Hoppe called it a rebellious, a rebellion to authority, and they think that that is what libertarianism is. And at a certain point, it became much more mainstream to become a progressive, and that's, I think, what created this reaction from the libertarians. Often enough, it was the edgy thing to be a progressive. It was the edgy thing to hold these views, but it wasn't edgy for a very long time to be leftist, socialist, or whatever. So many people, as a reaction to the rising economic leftism in the populace and the young populace, well, they became right wing because they wanted to be edgy. And they went in there and they didn't know anything about libertarianism. All they knew is, we live and let live. And then they got to Hoppe. They read Hoppe, and they saw, in where his passage where he mentioned, he questioned the validity of communists. They are in a persona, and this will often, to these people who don't have any understanding of libertarianism, uh, justify to them, well, we need to kill communists. And then it goes to, well, we need to do what's best for national interests. We need to commit genocide or kill Jews or something like
Mm.
that. And that is another big problem, where you have people go from a valid and justified position, which is, look, we have to have private property rights, we have to have liberty, but we cannot maintain it by just having open, licentiousness and deviancy. Uh, but eventually, they, being uninformed and being still sort of edgy and wanting to be counterculture, uh, react to the mainstream propagation of leftism by going all the way and becoming Nazis or fascists. Uh, I don't think that, unlike many people have accused me, I don't think we should ally with Nazis and fascists.
No,
When I say the
not at
alt
all.
right, I mean people who are paleoconservatives, people who are part of the old right, uh, and that is the goal. Uh, if you're talking about people going from libertarian to paleoconservative, or the part of the old right, I don't think it's a good idea, but I think that it is possible for you to do that without it being just a reaction to your limited knowledge on the movement and your edginess. You can't just do that. I've seen people do that. And that I dislike, because it means that people are leaving the beliefs that I want to propagate. My problem with that is limited. My problem mainly stands with kids, often enough, who don't know anything about the libertarian movements. They get into it in high school, and look, I got into it in high school, and then they become some kind of fascist or some kind of Nazi.
Yes, but I like your thesis on the fascists and the Nazis, but we need to clarify some important issues. Some
Mm,
are irritated when we argue that the Nazis were closer to socialism than capitalism. This is the truth. I have read
yes.
books written by serious writers. Many of these writers are dead, but they do admit that Nazis and the fascists were closer to socialism than to capitalism.
Yeah,
This
that's
is just
completely
a
true.
reality.
It's something that the leftists won't admit. And often enough, these kids, they don't know it themselves. They don't understand it themselves. Um, they think of they've been fed this idea, and these are the same people who will say that the government and the institutions are feeding you stuff, and they've been fed this idea that the furthest right you can go is Nazism or fascism, when really Nazism and fascism are not a right wing ideology. They are much closer to leftism than they are to the right wing. And I believe Paul Gottfried has
Yeah,
spoken
Paul
on this
Gottfried is a
extensively. So
yeah, Paul is
go
a genius.
yeah, Paul genius, Paul
Yeah,
the genius man,
yeah, Paul
and
is my mentor. Like I have learned a lot from Paul, and Paul in a sense has also helped to build my brand. Paul is a great
yeah,
guy.
Yeah, and look, I've read Chronicles. I love
Mm.
Chronicles. I think Paul is one of the smartest men
Yeah,
to
and
ever
Paul has
grace,
high
Paul and Tim.
standards. He has very high standards. So I write for Chronicles, and if
Yeah.
the piece is good, but he can be better, Paul will say it.
Mhm.
So I trust him 100%.
It's very good. I mean, he is a great writer.
Yeah, yeah.
So he has gone into this subject before, and he's written extensively on this. And look, it's clear they are leftists. I mean, well, maybe they won't call themselves leftists, but they are not right wing. They are closer to the left than they are to
Yes,
the
in
right.
terms of economics, they're closer to the left.
Yes,
But the issue of fascism is a bit more debatable. On that issue, Paul is more
yeah,
nuanced. He's not too
I
quick to
agree
say
with
that
them
they're on the
too.
left. And another issue with the Nazis is that the term national socialist is older than Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
older than Hitler. Before Hitler, socialists called themselves nationalists.
Yeah, yeah. This is something that predates Hitler. Many people
Yeah.
don't understand that. Uh, Similarly, the word socialism, in a sense, predates the Marxian socialism.
Yes.
So
There
many
was Robert
people,
Owen and many other
yeah,
societies that failed. Most of those collectivistic socialist societies failed. They
yeah.
didn't
You have
work.
the utopian socialists, for example, stuff like
Yes.
that. So uh, often these words get tied to the people who propagated them, and the people who propagated the ideologies too will often tie it to the people who they follow. So the Nazis will tie National Socialism strictly to Hitler, and socialists will tie socialism strictly to Marx, and they will often use that to ensure that there is like a propagation of specifically those ideas. When really there are some people who call themselves these things and who believe something different. So that's true too. But at least in the form of Hitler's Nazism, it was economically a left wing ideology. And I agree that the fascism of Mussolini is different. Again, Paul Goffrey does a book on this, and I'm sure
Yes.
you know about that.
Fascism,
Uh,
the concept of a career.
exactly. He is much more nuanced
Yes.
on this subject, which is very good because there needs to be some kind of nuance. Because at minimum, the fascists, they are. I think Mises wrote about this in his book Liberalism. They are to be thanked for
Yes, he said that the
crushing of
fascists
socialism.
saved Europe, and Mises is not the only writer who has made that remark. There are some smart people who are
Oh
also
yeah,
deceased who agree with him.
yeah. No, I was just using Mises as an
Yeah,
example for those of us who are libertarians, which I assume your audience is libertarian.
yeah, yes.
So
Mm,
Mises very openly agree to that, and that's a very good thing. In a fascism, I will always have its mark as saving Europe from
yeah,
socialism.
because
So
the Mussolini was a socialist in his youth, but he was
yeah,
also a bit smarter than the average socialist. So when it became
yeah,
evident that the economy was collapsing, Mussolini formed an alliance with mainly upper middle class and working class people, people who had assets and means. So I guess because of his relationship with the bourgeois, some assume that Mussolini was a right-wing dictator.
yeah,
But
and it,
the fascist economy grew up. Paul Baroque
yeah.
notes that didn't fail in one of his books. He commented on economic growth in Italy
Yeah,
during fascism.
yeah, no,
We're
and
not recommending fascism as an economic
yeah,
system,
none
but
of we're not
we get the
pro-fascism, and
point.
the economics of it
Yeah.
is not
No,
as good as ours.
no. But
But
the
I
fascists weren't
understand.
as anti-market as the real socialist and communist.
Yeah, and in a sense, Mussolini was more of a compared to Hitler was more of an intellectual person.
Yeah.
Mussolini was a avid reader of Kant, and then he moved on to Nietzsche, and I believe, he was into much more extensive political philosophy than
Yes.
Hitler was. So that is another. That's why there's much more nuance with Mussolini because Mussolini was more intelligent than Hitler.
Yes.
Uh,
And the
so
fascists are also authoritarian, not totalitarian. They don't
yeah,
want you to worship the state as a god. It's state oriented, but it's not as aggressive as other
yeah.
anti individualistic philosophies.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
So that's I think one of the reasons why many libertarian, and I don't think it's that many, but why some libertarians will go to that is because they misunderstand both libertarianism and fascism. They
Yes.
don't really understand it. They'll instead, they'll watch a Nick Fuentes clip, and I'm not saying Nick Fuentes is necessarily bad, because I think in a sense he is respectable, and I've spoken to him before. I think he's a good guy.
Who is
Um,
respectable?
Nick Fuentes
Oh, Fuentes.
in
Okay,
yeah,
yes.
in minimum his views on race and social issues. He's very good. Um, so I believe that many libertarians will watch one clip of his where he says, fuck libertarians or something like that. Uh, and they will use that to justify to themselves, well, we're going to have a totalitarian state
Mm.
in which we're going to just propagate this very strict reactionary view. And the thing is, the state in itself is a limiting factor of man and his property. And that's one of the reasons why man and the property that he usually holds and the domain, I mean, the people who are usually living within his property um, has been weakened. The family unit has been weakened by the state,
Yes.
and they fail to realize this.
The state has a natural tendency to grow. It's like biology. Organisms
Yeah.
need nutrients to thrive. The state requires power.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
That is
it
that
is
is the one thing that they fail to recognize and they fail to understand.
the state requires power to grow. But back to Rushton, there's
Mhm.
something I want to say. Rushton's ideas are not popular on the mainstream right or left, but I do read studies every now and then, especially studies published by psychologists, and they admit that the life history strategy of Black people is fast. It is not slow.
Yeah.
They don't mention science or genetics, but it is fast. So, knowing what we do know about Blacks and their life history strategy, what should we do to integrate them into society?
I think that in a sense,
But and before you answer this question, I must say that Chris, some blacks are not realists like us, but they do agree that the community needs improvement and they're often critical, though they're not on the right. So if they admit that there is a problem, why do we find it difficult to address such problem?
I believe that people need to have self determination, and each race is can have this validly. And in a sense, I think that there are some blacks which are much more pragmatic. There are some blacks which are more intelligent, and there are some blacks who understand the negatives that have come from their uh, predisposition here. Um, the reaction that I think must be had is that of racial separation. I think that each race can maximize their living standards under this. You can have most genetic similarity, you can have most cohesion, and of course, there's going to be always a gap between blacks and whites. It, many of the, I guess, to refer to them, many of top blacks, must remove themselves from this Al Sharpton point of view, which is, blaming whites for everything, and maybe go to like Marcus Garvey.
Chris, I'm happy you mentioned Garvey because I speak to people on the dissident right and they really like Garvey. So Paul likes Garvey, Gregory
Mhm.
Hood likes Garvey, and I like Garvey because Garvey was
Yes,
pro-Western, pro-Christianity, pro-free market. He was very traditional. He liked
yes,
reading the church fathers, and Garvey's understanding of empire building was very realistic.
yeah, and I respect Garvey for that. I think he's in history, he's one of the more respectable icons,
Yes.
much more than Martin Luther King in minimum. So that is, I think that many of the top intellectual blacks must take on this view. And in a sense, they must also take on a view that the dysgenic populace, the very low IQ people who are constantly reproducing, must either be completely defunded so they can limit their reproduction, and isolated possibly so they can limit their reproduction, or they must be kicked out of communities and societies. Either the lowest of the low for blacks have to be um, uh, they have to be there. You have to remove the money that we're giving them that allows them to continue breeding,
But
or
America can survive without welfare. America started as a very libertarian. Well, a state can't be libertarian, but it started as a
yeah,
pro-liberal state in the British sense. Welfare
yes.
was not important during the early years,
Mhm.
so
And
America
we saw
can't
better
survive
conditions for
without welfare.
blacks.
Yes,
Yeah, we saw much better conditions for blacks. And look, you'll never see it quite even out. But you will see it get better. And we all want it to get better. We all want to have much more ease when it comes to racial uh, integration, whether it be temporary or permanent. And there will always be cities which are racially integrated that won't be able to be stopped. So, in this sense, you have to accept that things like welfare, that you can't have them. This allows a dysgenic populace to breed. Uh, and if they continue breeding, then you must simply oust them. In a sense, you can't have a populace of people who are clearly unintelligent continually breeding. It will cause dysgenic growth. Now, you will see differences in IQ, as I said, and you will see differences in outcome, but you do have to do what is best, which is limit things like welfare and limit the so we can limit the reproduction of the lowest IQ people, and you can maximize the reproduction of the highest IQ people in these communities.
but people with low IQ are more impulsive. So even if they do not get welfare, they may still be motivated to breed. So that's a
That is,
problem. I think
that
we
is the
should just
problem. Yes,
reduce welfare because it's inconsistent with our philosophy. So
yeah,
destroy welfare based on ethical and moral grounds.
I agree. I prefer the ethical
Yeah,
grounds
ethical and moral
to it.
grounds. Yes.
I prefer it. Yeah. Though and but I think you can make the utilitarian argument for it too, though I prefer ethical. And my view there is simply like, yeah, like they will still be impulsive, but it'll be a little tougher for them. So if you can minimize the reproduction for the lowest IQ people, that's ideal, even if it's by a small amount.
Yes.
But yes, welfare is de facto immoral.
On
It's
several accounts, welfare reduces the incentive to save and work. It crowds out private charity. And
yep,
when welfare is pervasive, we're less likely to invest in our neighbors because the problems of the community should be solved by the state.
yeah, yeah.
Welfare really saps initiative.
It's the collectivization of individual responsibilities, really. And that is the problem. Individuals must deal with this. And to not allow them to deal with this means that they can always rely on the so called public good, which will inevitably create a system in which they have no care for their future. They can maximize current consumption and minimize future spending, and know that that's perfectly fine and there won't be any repercussions.
Yes, and sociologists have found that when the marriage culture it begins to decline, other problems emerge related to delinquency and income. So marriage is important and family is equally important. But leftists do not like the family because the family is a very individualistic unit. Your identity is shaped by your family members, your loved ones. Therefore,
Yeah,
if you
you're
destroy the family, you destroy innovation, the individual, and its very essence. And
yeah,
this
you're
is why
completely
leftists
right.
have a strategy that's anti-family.
You're completely right. The attack on the family unit has also been an attack on property because, as we all know, property is based around this idea of a family unit, a male homesteading it and created it for a family unit. Usually, that's what most of American society was. That's what the agrarian, liberals of the revolution pictured: a homestead and a family unit. And the attack on property rights, I think, is the and things like patriarchal systems is an integral attack against property.
Yes.
If you are somebody who believes that property rights should be mitigated or removed, this is what you go after first. There's a reason why Keynes was a homosexual, and Keynes wanted to establish this welfare
Do not be
state stuff.
polemical. Neil Ferguson made a similar point some years ago.
Yeah. Yes. So I think that you cannot have this attack on families and expect libertarian society to succeed.
Yes. And patriarchy is worth defending.
Mhm.
Patriarchy does not mean exploiting women. There are different types: equitable patriarchy and inequitable patriarchy. Under the present system, the patriarchy is equitable. Women have rights, they're autonomous, but society is designed to favor women. So, for example, during the refugee crisis, Canada accepted women and children. People are also less likely to harm women. Women offenders get lighter sentences, are less
Mhm.
likely to be arrested for certain crimes, especially relating to sex.
Yeah, you're completely right.
The-
There is a difference in how we treat women, uh, and that's not necessarily bad. That
No, I
is,
don't have a problem with favoring women because women can give birth. Women
yeah,
are also emotionally stable and they raise children. And again, the research is quite clear. Children do well in stable families, but they do even better when mom is at home.
yeah, and you're completely right there too. To in a sense, to treat women um to the standard of men is not
That's silly.
acceptable.
That's utter garbage.
It's not something. It's something that is propagated by like this overly feminist, like it's something that if a girl reads the Feminine Mystique once, she will have this idea that, well, we have to crush this patriarchal system, we have to crush gender, we have to crush any kind of attack on the woman, when really the attack on the woman comes from these people, comes from feminists, comes from people who want to propagate this overly unisex
Yes.
society.
And the truth is that women like masculine men, they like high status men, they like dominant men, and they're more likely to prefer male friends who are wealthy. Women like to be protected.
Yeah, women do, and it's clear this is all biological in a sense, and they will deny the biology of gender, uh, and even if you want to say that, gender is a social construct, okay, uh, let's just call it sex. Then they will deny the biology of that, because
Yes. Or come up with some
simply they know that
crazy
if we
term
look
like
at
woman X or some crap like that.
yeah, something idiotic, you know uh, they will they understand that if we do look into it with the lens of, well, this is a woman and we want to look at what is intrinsic to her behavior, what's psychologically true about her, it
Yes.
will trend towards that which the traditionalists espouse.
And patriarchy is also important because patriarchal systems give men a sense of purpose. Men need to form stable relationships, work hard, save, invest, and build their communities. And according
Yeah,
to anthropological research, patriarchy is good for civilization. Societies that are not operating under the system of patriarchy are usually less successful in terms of wealth and creativity.
yeah, the critique of patriarchy is really an odd one to me, because every group succeeds from patriarchy. A patriarchal system is intrinsic to us, and to reject it really is a childish rejection of the differences of man and woman. I go over this in my article a bit. I talk about often childish rejections that libertarians have to things like social hierarchy. Social hierarchy is going to exist, and it is not only intrinsic to us, but it's very useful. um, the social hierarchies will be created in any system of property. There will always be people who own
It's a
more. There
free
will always
market
be elites.
system. It is
You,
choosing winners.
exactly. It's
Some
it's
people are chosen because of their IQ, some are selected because of entrepreneurial abilities, others
yeah,
are chosen because they are beautiful.
exactly.
Even when you're
There's
dating a woman, you like her because of her physical or intellectual features. It is just a part of life.
yeah, and this is not something that can be denied, but leftists try to do it. Leftists try to deny this, and it's very clear why they're trying to deny it, because they know that if it comes to if we come to a point where we recognize this, well, many of their points will be destroyed
become
because
redundant, and they
there
cannot
is
be paid millions or thousands of dollars to teach us that we're racist.
yeah, there is a natural inequality of man and woman. There's natural inequality in many areas, which is why if this is not propagated, this idea of gender theory or whatever is not propagated, they will be screwed. They won't be able to succeed, which is all they care about. They do not care about ethics. They do not care about society at large. The supposedly intellectual leftists, the people who often work in the universities, they care mainly about
Money,
money, and
money
that
and
is the
status.
huge problem. Yeah, money and power.
Intelligent people have a greater desire to acquire status, and people who are affluent are also more inclined to like status. So we can't trust
Exactly.
elites. They're invested in increasing status.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The elites will never be, as long as there is a corrupting state power that can give them uh, power over the populace, can never be trusted. Which is another problem that's often faced by libertarians. This trust in elites.
Yes.
This Cato Institute, Koch brothers, uh, like unholy matrimony.
Yeah.
That
The Koch brothers, maybe as young people, they were very, very radical, but no, they're nice old men.
yeah,
They
I mean,
people in America dislike the Koch brothers, but they're really normal men. They're not radicals anymore.
they are not. No, and they were respectable back when Murray Rothbard was friends with them, and they started the Cato Institute. They were more respectable. But then eventually you saw uh, Rothbard drift away from them
Yes.
because it was clear, the radical caucus was failing in the Libertarian Party, and the Koch brothers were espousing very moderate, very non-radical beliefs, and Rothbard understood that a moderate is inferior in the advancement of political ideologies than a more extreme person who may disagree with me on tariffs or something of the sort, like Pat
Yes.
Buchanan.
Yes.
Uh,
The Koch brothers recognized that it was easier to just be normal people.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I wonder how
But Cato, I
useful
like
it is
Cato.
or moral it is.
The Cato Institute studies are really interesting.
Oh yeah,
I like their policy studies, but on a philosophical level, they're not on the dissident right. They prefer
oh
to
they're
be
not.
mainstream. But in terms of economics, they're really good.
They're not bad. Yeah,
Yeah, but
I think they have some bad stuff on their banking, the fractional reserve versus full reserve. I mean, they carry Thomas Selgin, for
yeah.
example, but
But I've read him.
they are respectable.
Read him. The Cato is good in terms of economics.
Yeah, that's true. Well,
Yeah.
Lipton, I did have to tell you, I really only planned for an hour, so I
Yeah.
don't have much more time. But
Yes. It's okay. We'll
yeah,
end soon. It's
mhm.
just surprising that you actually said it during the recording.
Said what? Oh, yeah. Uh,
Yeah, well, it's really. But I'll continue and get to the other point.
mm, uh,
Eastern European, the Irish, the Italians, these groups were once problematic in America, but they have improved. They have improved. So some on the right, like yourself, have you used the examples of these groups to suggest that we need to talk more about the black-white IQ gap because
mhm.
blacks have been in America for a long time,
Yeah,
but culturally they are still so different.
yeah, I think that's very true. When you look at it, the blacks, unlike the Italians or the Irish, and I'm half Italian too, so the Italians or the Irish, they are not really able to propagate a system. Uh, the blacks are that
Yeah,
is ideal for American assimilation. We saw the Irish integrate. The Irish and the Italians who were Catholic were able to integrate into Protestant culture, uh, but blacks were not. And I think this is probably due to the IQ differences. The Italians were a big problem for a very long time. But unlike blacks in matters of a couple generations, if not just one generation, they were able to fit and create a mold in society that it made them acceptable to the populace. Uh, and there's been this intrinsic problem with blacks all along, and most of us will relate that to IQ differences. Most of us who take this line of thought that I've been espousing today, uh, we will relate that to the idea that, well, look, the Italians have an average IQ of, I believe, 102 or something like that, and blacks have an average IQ in America of 83. So that is the difference here. You know, they will often try to point to this idea that they were problematic and now they're good, so can blacks. The leftists were,
Mm.
but really it's the exact opposite. They were problematic and now they're good, and after 400 years, blacks have not come around and fixed themselves.
Yes,
So
they have improved. They're more likely to attend
yeah,
college. More blacks are graduating, and apparently, according to Rod Shetty, black women out earn white women. So the statistics are not all bad. I even saw one study saying that educated blacks out earn similarly educated whites, but on a group level, they can do better. And what's also fascinating is this: many on the left and the right, especially the more progressive sort of people, do admit that standards for black should be lower. So, for example, I
mm,
think that when leftists attack IQ and SAT, they're implicitly saying that blacks must have a different standard. So, for example,
yeah.
one trainer, he's a black man, it was published in the New York Times. He said that expecting blacks to be punctual is racist.
Yeah, I saw that. That yeah, that really just to me establishes is very this concept that people will call me and you or you and I racist, but
But implicitly they accept our positions.
they accept the idea that there are differences,
So, for example,
and they accept
the
there are difference in
Smithsonian.
behaviors.
So, for example, the Smithsonian should have been praised for their
Yes.
whiteness triangle because look at what the Smithsonian said. The nuclear family is is a form of white supremacy. The nuclear family has been dominant in the West since the medieval ages, and maybe even before. The Greeks were monogamous, like the Romans. They attack individualism. Western society is uniquely individualistic. They
Mhm.
attacked objectivity and rationality. Both traits are valued by by Westerners. So it's
Yeah.
obvious that instead of conflating whiteness with race or superiority, we should just say, okay, whiteness is a philosophy of progress. These traits are not unique only to white people, but they emerge in Western society. Others can assimilate, but for the most part, Westerners express these traits and they're good traits. And by arguing that they're racist because blacks cannot meet them, you are really agreeing with us.
Yeah, I completely agree. They are unwilling to recognize, but they agree with us. They uh, follow the same logic that we do in the sense that we recognize their differences, and they do too, even if they don't want to openly recognize it. But they will often try to propagate this idea that the difference is it's actually better for blacks. Blacks we have to mimic blacks and not the other way around.
Exactly, and we're seeing the cultural transformation that's resulting in the deterioration of American society.
Yeah,
George
yeah.
Floyd was killed, unfortunately, but he was a career criminal. The
Mhm.
lady who killed Dante Wright committed gross negligence, but he was also a career criminal. Therefore,
Yep.
we cannot turn these people into saints.
Yeah,
It's unfortunate, but
we
we
cannot
cannot
respect
turn them
these
into
people.
saints. When white criminals are killed, some of us may cry, we're upset, but they don't become saints.
Exactly, exactly. That is the stark difference here that really the stark difference between many leftists is that and us, it's that we're able to look at nuance much better than they are.
E-
Uh, that
Exactly.
good.
Saint George Floyd and little children are saying that they want to be like George Floyd.
Yeah, and that is that is one of the worst areas. You have, it's St. George Floyd, and you have these people who want to propagate this, like, oh, this wasn't a meth addict and a career criminal. This was actually a great guy. Look, we have to come to terms with it. You can say that maybe Derek Chauvin shouldn't have done what he did or whatever, but
Yes, it was
you know,
inappropriate. The knee hold at that point was inappropriate, not illegal, but inappropriate.
sure. And in that sense, criticize him for being inappropriate, but we have to come to terms with the fact that this is not a respectable guy. This guy is being off the streets is an inevitable overall positive,
Yes,
even if God.
yeah. So, for example, in New York, I read in the new criterion that blacks are 23% of blacks commit 72% of shootings.
Yeah.
They must be held to account. When we lower the bar, we're saying that these people are like children. They lack moral capacity.
Yeah, and it really, I think if anything, the audience must be left with this: so that the right is willing to recognize nuance, is willing to recognize inequality, is willing to recognize the intrinsicness of human nature when it comes to things like race and gender, uh, and that the libertarians are part of the right as long as they're willing to recognize these things.
Yes,
So that
and
that is what must be understood.
and discriminating does not make one a racist. In sexual relationships, people discriminate. If you're employing someone, you want your employee to be very bright, so you discriminate in favor of intelligent people.
Yep. Yeah,
And
and
I've recognized that cultural segregation is now woke. So non-whites can form all black groups or all Hispanic groups, but whites can't organize. So what are we
yeah,
saying, that they are not people?
that's the idea that's going to be propagated. Really, it's trying to dehumanize whites and to uphold blacks as the
But
as
but
kangs.
yeah, but Chris, only children are virtuous. If one cannot engage in evil, he's basically a little boy.
That's
So again, we can't dignify blacks by treating them like children.
yeah. And then that is what the left is attempting to do, which is a huge problem,
But
really.
for a short period, because we will only speak for 1 hour, my videos don't exceed 1 hour and 20 minutes. I like to keep it short. So
Mhm.
we will mention your piece, A Critique of Left Libertarianism, Communism in Confusion.
Yep. So that article was essentially an attempt to uh, tell these egalitarian libertarians that they are not right wing, they are left wing, and they know that, of course. That's why they call themselves left libertarians. But to tell them that an idea of egalitarianism will not be propagated in a system of anarcho capitalism. That really the only system that can propagate this egalitarian dream that they have, this dream of rampant homosexuality, transsexuals everywhere, racial integration, this dream that they want to propagate, uh, will only be happen in a when we're talking about an anarchistic society, which is almost intrinsic to them, in a syndicalist or communist
Yes,
society.
and many of those societies fail.
And those societies will not succeed. We
Not
can
a
look at
natural leader will emerge.
yeah, we can look at for example, what was Catalonia? They attempted to have some anarcho-syndicalist society there, and what happened inevitably? It devolved into chaos. It devolved into uh, mass rampant attacks on people. There is no order in those societies, and while I am an anarchist in that sense, there must be order. Order, whether it be private through private law
You believe
or
in
through public law.
decentralized anarchy.
Yes, decentralized anarchy.
Yeah,
Yes.
decentralized anarchy. So we create mini groups with order, law, and varying degrees of property rights.
Yeah, and that is the difference between these communists and us. And the reason why it's so intrinsic to recognize this difference in property rights is because this is what divides us very strictly from the egalitarians. And to hold a view that is egalitarian when it comes to society would require you to abandon the view of property rights.
Yeah,
What do you want to become a syndicalists or communists, I don't know.
And that's why Rand didn't like anarchists. She said that it often reverted to socialism or other left-leaning ideologies.
She was, in a sense, right, because the anarchists that currently propagate capitalism, will often go through this trend where they become anarcho-capitalists, and then they devolve into like an agorist, and they devolve into like a syndicalist, and this is often because they still hold this very libertine, licentious, promiscuous views uh, on society.
Yes.
So that's the big problem.
And there's also the issue of the common good. I
Yeah.
think we need to speak more about this matter. So, for example, conservatives talk about the common good, like progressives, but the difference is that conservatives do not believe that the state should have the right to shape human nature. Progressives want you the force of the state to change us.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the common good from a right wing position, it's different.
Yeah, it is, in a sense that, of course, we propagate a common good in society, but we understand that human nature will lead to the inequality. This is something the left is unwilling to admit. They are unwilling to admit that you'll have an intrinsic inequality between races or genders or whatever, and their common good is a forceful move away from the commonly accepted truth that we are different to you must be equal. And this is why, another reason why the left libertarians cannot hold a system of anarcho-capitalism, because to them the common good must be equality. And if that is true, you must force it with the state, in that sense becoming socialistic, or you must, if you still want to become an anarchist, you must force it with strict egalitarian democratic councils, whether that be council communism or anarcho-communism or anarcho-syndicalism, which is all antithetical to what we as libertarians hold near and dear.
And our criteria for determining the common good is freedom and human flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
So we may judge the common good based on the ability of the state to promote law and order, liberty, and enable growth and entrepreneurship. Whereas,
We want
whereas
to
because
be free, they
progressives,
want to be
yes,
equal.
progressives care about equality. So they're
Yeah.
willing to engage in nefarious practices to achieve their goals. And we can look to totalitarian systems, and we may even look to the Nazis and Stalin and Lenin. Lenin who wanted to create a different type of man.
Yeah, it's propagated essentially by, uh, as you said very clearly, this idea of liberty versus equality, and essentially, I mean, there's a good quote by what's the name, John Randolph, which is, "I'm
Okay,
an
John,
aristocrat.
yes.
I love liberty. I hate equality." This is what is often propagated by us, and that is what when leftists hear that, they recoil and they view it as vile. But really, uh, that is the view that must be propagated by us, and a non-aristocratic view of society is what the left libertarians hold, and that's another reason why they really can't fit within our spectrum here. Uh,
Yes,
they
yeah,
fit in
I
another
like
spectrum, but uh, not ours.
I like your language. Aristocracy is very important. The real right is pro aristocracy.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
Like
Hoppe has a
up,
very good book on
yes,
it.
yes.
Yeah,
The
I
a
forget what
short
it's
history of
called.
progress.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
that
that's the
pamphlet,
right.
yes.
Yeah, it's a very short book for those who want to purchase it. It's like 100 pages or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
so Chris, what is your last say? What's your vision?
my vision for society is one of property rights, one of liberty over ownership,
Natural order. Okay.
of property, an adherence to what is natural for man, as you said,
But
natural
but but
order.
but 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 Chris, do you know what I like about our conversation? Usually when I'm doing an interview, it's very professional. I'm not saying that our interview is improfessional, but I've always wanted to have conversations with bright people and then record them. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm very formal. I'm a formal guy, but at the same time,
Mm.
I'm eccentric. So when I'm speaking, it can get a bit wild. And I've
Yeah.
always wanted to just have a normal conversation with an intelligent friend and then tape it. And you provided that platform, especially when you said, Lipton, I only have 1 hour. And I'm like, oh my God, you said that during an interview.
Well, look, I have to get I had to
Yeah,
get
so I'm
allergy
happy that
medicine,
you have to
man.
go. So I'm going to say bye, but please share, and I will continue to promote you and your work. But thanks for
Thank
coming,
you.
Chris. Bye.
Thank you, man.
Yes.
It was great being on, and I love your show.
All right.
I have to go though. Peace
Yeah.
out.
All right, bye.